16 years ago, a 24-year-old girl in Aurora stepped out of a clinic on a snowy night and vanished without a trace, leaving her family plunged into confusion and an unnamed fear. Authorities suspected her ex-boyfriend, along with a warehouse worker who had a history of violence, but with no body found and far too few leads, the investigation quickly stalled. Yet throughout those years, one detective from the cold case unit never gave up, clinging to every tiny remaining detail, like a last chance to bring the truth back into the light. And then one day, while reviewing some footage everyone thought was dead, she spotted a detail that everyone had overlooked. A detail powerful enough to change the entire case and shock the whole Aurora community. Before we dive deep into this haunting story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. The town of Aurora, Illinois, was entering the coldest days of winter, when the wind off the Fox River swept through the neighborhoods like tiny knives slicing at faces, and the roads lay buried under a thin, slick sheet of ice that slowed the entire city down. That afternoon, the sky was a thick, heavy gray, with the light fading as if being dragged down behind those weighty clouds. Hannah Cole, 24 years old, finished her shift at the dental clinic in Naperville, where she had worked for nearly 2 years, and was always described by coworkers as someone whose routine never changed. Clock out on time, head to her car, and drive straight back to the rental house she shared with her roommate in Aurora. She stepped out the back door of the clinic. The wind howled through the narrow corridor, making the door tap lightly against the wall as it closed behind her. Hannah wrapped her arms tightly around her coat, head slightly bowed against the wind, and hurried across the snow-covered parking lot in the dimming winter light. Everyone who saw her in those final moments described the same thing. She looked a little rushed, a little tense, as if deliberately avoiding looking in a certain direction. One witness, farther away and unloading items from his own trunk, saw Hannah standing next to the sedan she drove every day. But what caught his attention wasn't her hurried posture, it was the way she turned her head away and took a small step back, as if reacting to someone standing just outside his frame of view. There was no arguing, no unusual sound, only the howling wind and the crunch of snow underfoot. But that brief moment of hesitation in Hannah's stance, that slight defensive shift, was something he would think about for a long time afterward. The snow fell faster as Hannah opened her car door. The wind reduced visibility to just a few meters, and the parking lot lights were blurred by thick, cold mist. Within minutes the entire lot sank into dim darkness, where even the smallest movement could be completely swallowed up. That was the last moment the town of Aurora ever saw Hannah Cole. When she didn't come home as usual, her family started calling her. The long ringing with no answer spread worry like a tightening cord with every passing minute. They tried friends, tried her workplace, tried all the places she usually stopped by, but every lid came back with the same answer: no one had seen her after she clocked out. Hannah's roommate stood frozen at the front door, staring down the pale white road in front of the house, the unease rising sharply. Hannah had never disappeared without a word, never ignored her phone, never left anyone waiting. That silence from her that night was so out of character, it almost seemed to warn that something was deeply wrong. As the hours ticked by with no word, worry turned to dread. The family could wait no longer. They called the police, setting in motion a long, complicated and haunting chain of events that no one in this small town could have imagined would follow them for years to come. Aurora PD received the missing person report for Hannah Cole that very night, and just minutes after the information was logged, the first patrol car was rolling down the snow-covered roads, kicking off the initial phase of the investigation, a phase that investigators later said didn't feel like any ordinary missing person case. Their first move was to review Hannah's departure from the clinic. The camera mounted at the back door captured her stepping out, showing no immediate signs of being followed or in danger at that moment. She walked with a brisk stride, head slightly bowed against the wind, and no one else appeared in the frame. However, just 2 blocks away, a convenience store security camera captured a detail that instantly flipped every initial assumption held by law enforcement. A black SUV driving slowly in the direction Hannah would normally take toward the parking lot. The vehicle didn't overtake, didn't come to a full stop, It just maintained a deliberately low speed, as if observing or waiting for something. From the camera's angle, the license plate was blurred by clinging snow, but the taillight design and vehicle frame allowed investigators to determine it was likely a mid-size SUV from the 2002 to 2006 production years. A common type of vehicle, but still narrow enough to tighten the initial search parameters. Not long after the footage was pulled, the digital forensics team accessed the first cell tower data from Hannah's phone. The results forced the team to re-examine every assumption. Instead of moving along the road toward the house she shared with her roommate, Hannah's phone pinged in the opposite direction, heading straight toward Fox Valley Mall. This ran completely counter to every established habit she had shown before. Investigators laid out two possibilities. 1. Hannah had voluntarily changed her route because the snow was too heavy, and she needed to avoid slippery roads, or 2. And this possibility grew stronger, the more they scrutinized the data. Someone had forced her to head in a different direction. This became even more significant when they compared the phone's movement speed to the average vehicle speed in those snowy conditions that day. The signals showed the phone traveling at a steady, consistent pace with no unusual stops, like someone pulling over to buy something or making sudden turns. It had the linear quality of a vehicle in motion, not of a pedestrian or an impromptu journey. One investigative team was dispatched to the area where Hannah lived to check if she might have stopped somewhere else before losing contact, but none of the neighbors or places she regularly visited reported seeing her. In contrast, one critical detail from the digital records made the atmosphere in the command room grow even heavier. Hannah's phone signal didn't fade gradually, as it would if the battery were dying. It shut off abruptly, while the battery level was still relatively high. This is the kind of signal typically seen when a phone is manually powered off, has its battery removed, or is destroyed. The lead investigator on shift, Sergeant Miles Hartman, stared at the data board on the screen and delivered the investigation's first major assessment. If the signal dropped cold like that, we're no longer talking about an ordinary disappearance. At the same time, the video analysis team adjusted the brightness and contrast on the footage from the camera, 2 blocks from the clinic. When the brightness was increased, the image of the black SUV became slightly clearer, especially the way it slowed to an almost fixed distance behind Hannah. Hartman immediately ordered a check of all vehicles matching that make and model registered within a 10-mile radius of Aurora. While vehicle records were being pulled, another team headed straight to Fox Valley Mall to determine whether Hannah had actually gone there, or if the phone signal had simply been brought to a location near the mall. The bitter cold made on-scene work difficult, but they still combed the parking lots, store entrances, and the northern perimeter areas. What they found was startling. The mall cameras showed no footage of Hannah entering the shopping center. Not a single trace, not a glimpse, not one video clip indicating she had been at any entrance. This meant that, even though her phone had moved toward the mall, Hannah herself may never have stepped inside, or she never made it to the mall. One investigator muttered quietly, while staring at the footage timeline that showed nothing but empty time. By that point, the investigators understood the case was veering in a direction completely different from what the family had hoped. There was no evidence Hannah had left Aurora voluntarily, no sign she had changed habits or had any personal reason to disappear. The scattered pieces were beginning to form an unsettling picture: an SUV following behind, an illogical route, a phone signal abruptly terminated, and no appearance by Hannah at the destination the data pointed to. At this stage, the main investigative engine was officially running, and every early indicator, rather than leading to answers, only opened up more persistent questions. Was Hannah forced to change direction? Who was driving the SUV? Why was the phone shut off right after that? And most critically, where did Hannah disappear? Aurora PD knew they were entering a case that was anything but simple, and every step forward would only make the picture darker. The next morning, as the search team expanded their perimeter around Fox Valley Mall, a young Aurora PD officer called over the radio, in a voice almost choked from the biting cold. "I think we've found her car." Hannah's silver sedan sat motionless in the wide northern parking lot of the mall, where hundreds of empty spaces stretched out under a thick blanket of white snow. The snow on the hood and windshield was piled evenly enough that it was clear the car had been there for many hours, likely since the previous evening, when the snowstorm had begun to thicken. Hartman arrived on scene immediately. He stood in front of the vehicle, studying every detail while his breath froze into white plumes. There were no signs of sudden braking, no skid marks, no indication whatsoever that the car had been stopped by any external force. It was simply parked there, as if Hannah herself had driven up, turned off the engine, and walked away. But if that was the case, where had she gone? And why leave the car without taking her purse, without locking the doors, without keeping the keys? When the officers opened the car under forensic supervision, the first thing they noticed was the suspicious absence of items Hannah always carried: no purse, no keys, no phone. The dashboard was unnaturally clean, no signs of rummaging, no scattered belongings. The driver's seat was still adjusted exactly as Hannah's coworkers had seen her use it. On the surface, the car appeared to have experienced no incident at all. But when an investigator leaned down to examine the right rear door edge, he saw the first thing that didn't match: a 3-inch-long scratch, with bare metal exposed beneath the scraped paint. No snow clung to the edges of the scratch, meaning it had occurred before the snow fell that night. Hartman ordered immediate photographs, then signaled forensics to check whether this could be evidence of someone trying to pry the door, or scraping against an object. Yet the most significant discovery of the day didn't come from the scratch. It came from the driver's side door handle. A technician leaned in close, brushed away the thin layer of snow, and froze when he noticed an unusual black color. He shone an LED light, tilted his head for a closer look, then reported, "There's paint transfer here." The black paint was very thin, but wasn't mixed with road dirt or de-icing salt. It had the distinctive stickiness of industrial-grade paint, not ordinary automotive paint. In the dim light of the winter morning, this paint stood out strangely, like an accidental mark left behind. And that became even more notable when no vehicle had been parked close enough to Hannah's car to cause a collision. There weren't even any tire tracks skidding up against the side. Forensics immediately collected a sample, tagged it as evidence, and sealed it in an evidence bag. Meanwhile, Hartman stood silently, eyes scanning the empty rows of parking spaces stretching out ahead. What had happened here? Had someone brought Hannah to this area? Did she drive here herself, or was she forced to? And most importantly, why were there no signs of a struggle? The silence of the car stood in complete contrast to the chaos the investigators were beginning to sense from the unfolding case. A typical disappearance leaves misleading data or disjointed clues, but here everything was too clean, too orderly, as if someone had deliberately left the car in a way that would prevent police from immediately figuring out what had really happened. Beneath the thick snow, the forensics team found a few faint impressions around the vehicle, shallow footprints, not deep enough to determine shoe size or body weight. But what was striking was their direction. Instead of heading toward the mall entrance or away from the lot, these footprints circled the car within a few feet radius, then disappeared toward an uncleared snow area, an area with no direct camera coverage. This shifted the suspicion sharply. If Hannah hadn't taken her purse, hadn't locked the car, hadn't taken the keys, it was very possible she hadn't had the opportunity to do those things. And if someone had intentionally left the car here, they had done so very skillfully, leaving only small scattered clues but enough to suggest something abnormal. Hartman called the team to pause, took another careful look at the overall scene, and delivered a short but heavy conclusion. This isn't a place she left the car on her own. Once the black paint sample was sealed, and the scene was fully marked, the investigators knew they had found their first piece of valuable evidence. But they didn't yet know that the fragile paint smear on that door handle would become the key that unlocked a chain of events no one on the team could have anticipated. Where did Hannah disappear from? Why was the car sitting here motionless? And what happened between the moment she stepped out of the clinic and the moment the car appeared in this parking lot? Those questions crowded Hartman's mind as he stepped back from the scene, looking at the silent sedan amid the blinding white snow, like a mystery just beginning to reveal itself. As the forensics team began clearing the snow around the sedan, The faint shoe prints they had initially thought were chaotic footprints from falling snow immediately drew their attention. Under the LED lights shining close to the ground, the true shape became clear. The prints were much larger than Hannah's foot size, pressed deeper into the snow than a slim, small woman like her could have made. The depth was even, the stride steady, with no signs of running or panic. These were the footsteps of someone calm and purposeful. One technician leaned in close, using the tip of a pen to brush away clinging snow from the sole, and immediately called Hartman over to look. The snow surface revealed a distinct tread pattern with deep grooves and thick horizontal ridges, not athletic shoes, nor the kind of leather boots ordinary people wear in winter. This was a sole designed for slippery environments, especially cold storage warehouses and industrial facilities. Hartman recognized the pattern almost instantly. He had seen it before in an old case involving cold storage workers in Joliet. This type of shoe isn't sold retail. It's usually issued in bulk by companies to employees. That completely shifted the team's perspective. The person who appeared around Hannah's car wasn't some random passerby in the parking lot. This was very likely someone who worked in an industrial setting that required specialized protective gear. Looking back at the footprints, the investigators noticed something even more striking. The tracks circled Hannah's car exactly 3 times, not in a straight line, not heading away from the area, but in closed, regular, deliberate loops. Someone had walked around the vehicle as if inspecting it from every angle, a behavior impossible to mistake for coincidence. This was the movement of someone assessing the situation, observing, or waiting for a reaction from inside the car. Forensics continued expanding the search, looking for matching prints. They followed a chain of footsteps that extended toward the corner of the lot where the snow lay thick and uncleared. The prints vanished in that area, a spot outside camera view. That meant the person who left the footprints had exited via a concealed path, did not return, and left no further signs behind. Hartman stood observing the entire scene. He slowly pieced together what was right in front of him. A stranger wearing specialized protective footwear, circling Hannah's car multiple times, then departing in a direction no one could see. The fact that this person didn't move toward the mall entrance, and showed no sign of approaching well-lit areas, indicated their purpose wasn't shopping or working at the mall. They had come here for the car, and very likely for Hannah herself. When forensics scooped a portion of snow next to the footprints for analysis, they found tiny specks of fine white powder, a kind that clings to the shoes of workers in low-temperature areas where crates or floors develop frost. This type of dust couldn't be on the shoes of an ordinary pedestrian in snowy conditions. It came from a very specific occupational environment. That made the scene even more chilling. Whoever approached Hannah might be familiar with hidden cold specialized places most people in Aurora never notice. A forensics technician handed Hartman a magnified photo of the shoe print on a tablet. This tread pattern only shows up in a few job categories, he said. Cold storage, food preservation facilities, or large industrial warehouses. Hartman nodded slowly. For the first time in Hannah's disappearance case, he felt he was touching something real, not vague speculation, not misleading data, but a sharp, clear piece that could connect to a real person out there. He looked again at the loops around the car, 3 complete circles, unhurried, unpanicked. Those weren't the marks of someone casually passing by. Those were the marks of someone with intent, someone prepared, someone standing exactly where Hannah vanished. Forensics documented every footprint, carefully sealed the samples, and used a laser measure to reconstruct the stride distances. The simulation showed a stride length consistent with a man over 6 feet tall, that narrowed the scope even further. Once the entire area was marked, Hartman walked away from the parking lot, taking one last look back at Hannah's sedan, silent, cold, surrounded by the footprints of someone they didn't yet know, but clearly not harmless. From those footprints, he understood one thing: the person knew exactly what they were doing, knew how much time they had, and knew how to avoid being caught on camera. That person didn't come here by chance. That person had followed Hannah, and stood right at the place where she disappeared. When Hannah's sedan was towed to the forensics impound area, the focus of the investigation immediately shifted to Fox Valley Mall, the place where her phone signal stopped, and where the car was found. The mall had a dense camera system covering the parking lots and all entrances and exits, so Hartman believed that if anything had happened to Hannah, at least one camera would have captured it. But that hope quickly evaporated when the tech team checked the north-facing camera, the only angle with a direct view of the area where Hannah's car was parked. That camera recorded nothing during the most critical time window. It wasn't blurry footage, it wasn't an off-angle shot, it was completely lost signal. The screen showed only white static from the moment Hannah left the clinic until the snow began to thicken. The anomaly wasn't a technical failure, it was the timing. It lined up exactly with the window when Hannah disappeared. Hartman ordered an immediate forensic check. Within minutes of opening the camera housing, the tech team confirmed the camera's cable assembly had been physically tampered with. It wasn't wind damage or temperature-related severance, it was a strong, deliberate pull and twist, as if someone had intentionally disrupted the connection to disable the camera. "Someone didn't want us to see what happened here," one technician said, and Hartman knew he was right. Out of dozens of mall cameras, only one had been disabled, and it was the very one that could have captured Hannah or her car at the moment of the incident. This development made the entire team begin to sense the hand of someone prepared, someone who understood how the camera system worked and knew exactly what needed to be done to avoid being seen. Yet even with the north-facing camera disabled, the area was still covered by farther away cameras, devices that weren't close to Hannah's car position but still captured broader sections of the parking lot. When the tech group reviewed footage from this secondary system, an image appeared that silenced the room in the dim yellow glow of the parking lot lights. Two figures stood next to a sedan that matched the shape of Hannah's car. The footage wasn't sharp, the camera was quite far away, and the snow was falling heavily that day, but the vehicle outline, color and position all lined up. One of the figures was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with confident strides, exactly matching the description derived from the footprints forensics had analyzed earlier. The other figure was smaller, standing close to the car door, occasionally leaning in as if facing or speaking to the other person. Although positive identification from the camera was impossible, the way the smaller figure stood and turned her head sent a chill down Hartman's spine. The build matched descriptions of Hannah herself. The two stood together for only a few seconds before the image faded as snow swept across the lens. There was no sound, no distinct movement, just the distance between the two figures closing, as if someone was stepping closer. The footage wasn't enough to confirm violence, but it was enough to confirm a truth: everyone had been trying to avoid admitting Hannah was not alone in that parking lot. This opened an entirely new investigative direction. If she had met someone there, the question wasn't just who, but why. How had she left the clinic only to end up in the parking lot near the mall, and why was that man there at exactly that moment? Hartman ordered enhancement processing on the footage to extract more details. When brightness was slightly increased and edges sharpened, the forensics team spotted one small but crucial additional detail. The sedan in the image had a reflective glint in exactly the rear door area, the same spot that matched the fresh scratch they had found on Hannah's car. This was the first piece of evidence indicating the scene in the footage likely occurred right before the car was left behind. It wasn't an earlier recording, and it wasn't a coincidence of a similar vehicle. That image very likely captured the last moment Hannah was near her own car. As the forensics team continued running simulations to pinpoint the exact time the two figures appeared, they realized the sequence aligned perfectly with the period when the north-facing camera had been disabled. That meant someone hadn't just appeared next to Hannah's car, they had known precisely which camera needed to be taken out to avoid close-range capture. This behavior didn't resemble a random stalker, it resembled someone familiar with the area, knowledgeable about camera positions, and with a reason not to be identified. Hartman looked back at the static-filled footage, then at the image from the distant camera. Even without clear details, the truth was unmistakable. Hannah stood next to the car, not passively. She stood as if facing someone or being held there by the unidentified man. And that person had had enough time to disable the nearest camera before appearing in the frame of the second one. When the screen went dark, everyone in the room felt what no one wanted to voice: This disappearance was not a spontaneous incident. This was planned, informed and deliberate, and the moment of seeing those two figures next to the car had completely changed the way they viewed the Hannah Cole case. The first person Aurora PD needed to talk to was Mark Dalton, Hannah's ex-boyfriend, whom her family said she had broken up with a few months earlier, but still occasionally communicated with. Mark was invited to the station the following afternoon, wearing a thick coat, his expression somewhat confused, but showing none of the panic many people exhibit when tied to a serious disappearance. When Hartman asked him when he had last seen Hannah, Mark answered immediately, without hesitation. "I didn't see her. Not yesterday. Not last week. I had no idea where she was going last night." His voice was steady and calm, to the point that Hartman made a private note, possible over-control of demeanor. But when the investigative team presented the footage from the camera 3 blocks from the clinic, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The image wasn't sharp, but it was clear enough to recognize Mark's dark green pickup truck driving slowly in the direction of Hannah's clinic, right around the time she left work. Hartman slid the tablet toward Mark. "How do you explain this?" Mark looked at the screen for a few seconds, then shrugged. "Just a coincidence. I was driving by. I had my own business." The answer was too simple, too casual for a detail that any innocent person would feel compelled to clarify immediately. Hartman pressed on, this time asking about the route Mark had taken that afternoon, when Hannah disappeared. Mark said he had driven home after stopping at a hardware store. But when they checked the old GPS data still stored in Mark's vehicle, a type of data most users don't even know exists, the vehicle location data showed he hadn't gone toward home as claimed. Instead, during the time window matching Hannah's departure from the clinic, Mark's truck appeared near the road, leading to Fox Valley Mall, not far from where Hannah's sedan was later found. This wasn't a minor discrepancy. It was a direct contradiction between his statement and the actual data. Hartman repeated the question, this time more clearly and directly. "Why does your vehicle's GPS show you near the mall area that night?" Mark looked down at the table, paused for a few seconds, then offered an explanation that sounded hastily pieced together. "I was just driving around. I needed to think. I didn't know Hannah was there. I wasn't following her." Even though the words seemed calm, his voice had lost its earlier certainty. Hartman said nothing for several seconds, letting the silence stretch and build pressure. Mark began rubbing his hands, shifting in his seat, classic psychological signs of someone forced to maintain a lie. When asked about their recent relationship, Mark said they had broken up amicably and that both had remained polite. But when police pressed deeper, specifically about reports that Hannah had complained about Mark showing up unannounced at her workplace several times after the breakup, he immediately denied it. However, clinic records showed 2 instances where Hannah had told coworkers she felt uncomfortable seeing Mark waiting in the parking lot, just to talk things out clearly. This detail made Mark's account even harder to believe. One of the things Hartman noticed most was Mark's eyes when he viewed the distant camera footage of the 2 figures next to Hannah's car. It wasn't fear, it wasn't shock, it was a cold, focused attention, as if he were trying to gauge how much the police already knew. "Do you recognize anyone in this image?" Hartman asked. "No," Mark replied, too quickly to feel natural. While Mark's answers tried to appear consistent, each piece of data continued to reveal glaring gaps. He said he hadn't been near where Hannah lived, but cameras caught his truck near the clinic. He said he went shopping, but there were no receipts or matching timestamps at any store within miles. He said he hadn't gone near the mall, but the vehicle GPS said otherwise. When the interview paused, Hartman stepped out into the hallway and reviewed all his notes, 3 major contradictions in under an hour. This was no longer coincidence. This was a hastily constructed statement. More troubling was that Mark might know far more than he was admitting, and very possibly had been in the area where Hannah disappeared. When Hartman returned to the room, Mark looked up as if awaiting a verdict. But instead of pressing harder, Hartman simply said, "We'll need to talk to you again." Mark nodded, trying to maintain composure, but everyone could see he was no longer as confident as when he had walked in. As he left the station, Hartman watched him go, feeling clearly what years of investigative experience had taught him. Innocent people don't generate this many contradictions in a single interview. And the question now wasn't just what Mark had gotten wrong, It was what was he hiding about the night Hannah Cole disappeared. After interrogating Mark, and noting the glaring contradictions in his statement, Hartman decided to return to Hannah's sedan for a second examination. He wanted to make sure no detail had been overlooked, especially as what they knew about this disappearance was opening up new, deeply unsettling directions. The car sat in the forensics warehouse, bathed in harsh white light, where every scratch or speck of dust could become a critical clue. The first examination had focused on the driver's compartment and the areas around the vehicle, but Hartman suspected the trunk, often overlooked, might hold something the team had missed. When forensics opened the trunk, a blast of cold air escaped from the narrow space inside. They began inspecting every inch of the surface, from the carpet liner to the plastic crevices, and just minutes later, a technician paused, using tweezers to lift a hair more than 8 inches long. The hair was dark brown, straight, completely unlike Hannah's light and short hair. It wasn't hers, and more importantly, it wasn't tangled in the carpet or caught on an object. It lay neatly at the edge of the trunk carpet, a position suggesting it had fallen there when the trunk was opened. That meant someone had opened Hannah's trunk very close to the time she disappeared. Hartman ordered the hair sealed immediately. When the forensics team examined the metal interior of the trunk, they also found a faint black paint smear on the hinge area. This paint smear differed from the black paint on the door handle. It was darker, more firmly adhered, and its chemical composition matched the type of paint used on industrial machinery, not automotive paint. The analysis team pulled samples from the lab and cross-referenced them in the system of paint types used in the Aurora area. The results made Hartman stand up straight. The smear matched the paint used at warehouses in the Aurora Industrial District, a large industrial zone less than 15 minutes drive from Fox Valley Mall. It wasn't just one facility using this paint. 6 companies in the industrial district used the same type for maintaining equipment, refrigeration compressors or metal racks. This suddenly widened the suspect pool, but also sharply focused it on a specific group of people with certain occupations and habits. People who regularly came into contact with that paint, and by the logic of the footprints, were also the ones wearing industrial protective footwear. The correlation had never been clearer. Industrial boot print, cold storage dust clinging to them, industrial paint on the door handle, industrial paint in the trunk, missing items from the car phone location. Pinging Hannah toward the mall, then abruptly shutting off. Hartman stood beside the sedan, his finger tapping lightly on the metal edge, as was his habit whenever he was mentally reorganizing the entire sequence of events. Someone who worked in the industrial district had approached Hannah. That person had enough time to circle the car, the ability to open the trunk, and drop a hair belonging to another woman, or someone he had been in close contact with shortly before. And most critically, that person appeared in the exact area where the camera had been disabled. The forensics team dug deeper and found small granular stains in the trunk, similar to the dust found on the footprints around the car. Preliminary analysis showed this was the kind of dust that appears in low-temperature environments, places like cold storage or refrigerated cargo areas. This further reinforced the hypothesis that whoever approached Hannah had a connection to the Aurora Industrial District. When the lab report reached Hartman's desk, he marked each of the 6 companies on the list that used that paint. He looked at the map and saw they all lay within convenient radius for moving between the clinic, the mall, and the industrial district in a short time frame. Someone who knew the routes well, knew how to avoid camera angles, knew how to take advantage of heavy snow nights to cover tracks. That could not be a random act. Hartman called the investigative team into the small conference room and put the list of 6 companies up on the whiteboard. "We start here," he said. "Who works at these places, who works near the mall, and who has any history of contact or conflict with Hannah? Every single one gets checked." As the investigators left the room to prepare for the long day ahead, Hartman stayed behind a moment longer, staring at the sealed hair sample bag on the table. A tiny trace, but silent evidence that at the moment the trunk was opened, someone had been very close to Hannah. And from this point forward, the case was no longer just about the question, where did Hannah go? It was about who used this car to hide what. When the list of 6 companies in the Aurora Industrial District was put up on the board. The investigative team began scrutinizing each one to determine which was most likely connected to the paint found on Hannah's car door handle. They checked batch codes, chemical compositions, and restocking frequency for each company, and within just a few hours, one name was immediately circled: Midwest Cold Storage, a large-scale cold storage warehouse that specializes in preserving food and distributing goods to supermarkets in the region. The paint forensics found in Hannah's trunk matched 100% with the type Midwest uses to coat their racks and refrigeration compressor systems. Not only that, the dust clinging to the footprints around Hannah's car also matched the dust commonly produced from this company's warehouse floors. That made Midwest the first destination for the investigative team. Hartman and two other officers arrived at the company late in the afternoon during a shift change for the workers. The air inside the warehouse was bitterly cold, with frigid vapor wafting from the rows of freezers. Fluorescent lights reflected off the floor, creating a feeling that everything was overly bright, while the corners remained shrouded in shadow. The warehouse manager, a middle-aged man named Kellerman, led them to the maintenance area where industrial paint was used. After a few questions, Kellerman provided the list of employees authorized to access that area: only 3 people, 2 shift workers, and 1 full-time maintenance technician named Daniel Hobb, 33 years old. The moment Kellerman mentioned that name, a young investigator standing next to Hartman looked up because he recognized familiar information. Daniel Hobb had appeared in their records when they reviewed criminal backgrounds of workers in the industrial district. Hobb had no convictions, but he had a history of a civil lawsuit filed by a former female co-worker, alleging threatening behavior, property damage, and in her words, an unpredictable temper that could explode at any moment. The lawsuit was settled out of court. No one was convicted, but it was enough to make the investigators feel they needed to look much closer. When Hartman asked whether Hobb had been on duty the evening Hannah disappeared, Kellerman pulled up the shift records. He opened the log on the computer, then paused for a second, seeming surprised. That night, he was here. Afternoon maintenance shift that ran until almost 9 p.m. Hartman made an immediate note. Hobb's shift aligned suspiciously with the time frame when Hannah left the clinic, traveled past the mall area, and vanished. But even more telling was that the route from the Naperville Clinic to Fox Valley Mall could pass through the residential neighborhood where Hobb had taken maintenance contracts several years earlier. Another investigator pulled Hobb's file, and that was when a critical detail emerged. Hobb had once performed refrigeration system maintenance for a small shop located directly behind the clinic where Hannah worked. That meant even if Hannah didn't know his name, it was very possible he had seen her, knew the area where she worked, knew the routine around that building. When Hartman reviewed the camera footage from near the clinic again, the image of the black SUV driving slowly suddenly gained another layer of meaning. Midwest Cold Storage used mid-size SUVs for their maintenance supervision fleet. Not all of them were black, but in the company's asset list, there was a 2004 black SUV assigned to Daniel Hobb. Suddenly, the small seemingly scattered pieces began to connect: industrial paint in Hannah's trunk, cold storage dust on the footprints, protective boots of the type used in cold warehouses, black SUV following Hannah, disabled camera, and a maintenance worker with a history of threatening women. No single piece was enough on its own to conclude anything, but when put together, they began to form a terrifying possibility. Hartman requested a check of the GPS history for the SUV assigned to Hobb, but Kellerman said the vehicle didn't have modern tracking equipment. However, it was serviced on a regular schedule, and each service recorded mileage. If the mileage showed an unusual increase on the day Hannah disappeared, that could be a lead. While waiting for the technical department's records, Hartman asked to see where Hobb worked in the warehouse, a corner maintenance area right next to the freezer rows, so cold that every breath formed visible vapor. The warehouse floor had a layer of white dust identical to what forensics had found on the footprints, and when a worker walked by, the protective boots he wore left a tread pattern exactly matching the soles around Hannah's car. Hartman said nothing, just stared at the fresh prints, then turned and spoke quietly to the investigator beside him. "It's clear we can't overlook this man." But what caught Hartman's attention most wasn't the work environment. It was a casual remark from Kellerman: "Hobb likes the night shifts. Fewer people, less questions." Hartman wrote that down, because in a disappearance where every sign pointed to someone meticulously prepared, liking to work alone in low-traffic areas, was something that absolutely could not be taken lightly. When they left Midwest Cold Storage, Hartman carried a long list of questions, and Daniel Hobbs' name was no longer somewhere in the middle of potential suspects, it was now at the very top. Even though the clues gathered from Midwest Cold Storage had elevated Daniel Hobbs' name as the most likely potential suspect, Hartman still lacked sufficient direct evidence to obtain an arrest warrant. Everything remained at the level of suspicious coincidence: matching paint types, compatible cold storage dust, protective footwear soles identical to the footprints around Hannah's car, and a black SUV within the company's fleet. But in legal terms, matching does not equal guilty. The investigative team could not prove that Hobbs had met Hannah in the parking lot, nor could they prove he was the person appearing in the blurry footage, showing two figures next to the car. Similarly, Mark Dalton's contradictory statements were not strong enough to charge him. He may have lied about his whereabouts that night, but lying is not evidence of criminal conduct. Mark's vehicle GPS only placed him near the mall area. It did not prove any specific actions. Two suspects, one with a vague motive, one with a history of violence, but no direct evidence to tie either to the crime. Worse still, the physical evidence the team was trying to exploit all hovered on the boundary between possibility and speculation. An unidentified hair, industrial paint used in too many locations, footprints that could not be definitively linked to an individual. The deeper they investigated, the more they realized the disappearance had occurred under the worst possible conditions imaginable. Heavy snow erasing traces, the only close-range camera deliberately disabled, and the timing falling squarely in the mall's shift change window, when there were the fewest witnesses. After nearly 3 months of collecting every possible piece, the file still lacked the critical element: no evidence Hannah left the car voluntarily, and no evidence anyone forced her to. The silent sedan, the faint camera images, the conflicting statements, but none of it strong enough to convince a court. Hartman was at an impasse. He had pursued the case for weeks, working through nights to connect the clues, but every time it seemed a link had been found, everything closed up again like fresh snow erasing footprints. "We need more than this," he said in the final meeting before the case was escalated. But more, in that moment, did not appear. By the end of the year, the prosecutor's office informed them they could not proceed further without new evidence emerging. That decision felt to Hartman like a massive door slamming shut right in front of him, but he knew there was nothing more he could do. And so Hannah Cole's file was moved to the unsolved cold case category. The evidence boxes were sealed, labeled, and sent down to the basement storage area of Aurora PD. The digital files were archived on an old server, buried among hundreds of prior unsolved cases from previous years. The hair, the paint samples, the footprints, the blurry video, all of it was placed on hold, like an unfinished story. The Hannah Cole case fell silent. 6 years passed slowly, and as coldly as the night she vanished. Hannah's family still called the police every year, hoping for something new, but nothing changed. Hartman occasionally reopened the file, looked at the crime scene photos, as a habit he could not shake, but he no longer had the authority to launch deeper investigation, as every effort led to a legal wall. During that time, investigative technology advanced dramatically. Digital analysis techniques, camera restoration methods, and behavioral assessment models were far more sophisticated than in 2008. But those capabilities were never applied to Hannah's case, because the file had sunk into storage, and no one proactively pulled it back to the priority list. The evidence that once held potential to crack the case now simply sat in boxes, covered by the dust of time. No one knew that a few of those items, especially the unviewable video files, and the seemingly meaningless samples, would become the keys that changed the entire landscape later. But at that moment, as the 6th year passed since the day Hannah disappeared, the case had no movement whatsoever. No suspect arrested, no new breakthroughs, no trace of Hannah, only a long, thick, heavy void, a void that made the Hannah Cole case one of Aurora PD's coldest files. In 2014, when Aurora PD decided to restructure its backlog case handling division, a portion of the unsolved missing persons cases was transferred to the newly formed cold case unit. Among the dozens of files placed on the desks of this unit, one folder made Detective Laura Jennings pause longer than usual, the file named Hannah Cole, missing in 2008. Jennings, a sharp investigator, with a specialty in surveillance data analysis, always had the habit of reading files in reverse chronological order, from conclusions to crime scenes, from failures back to origins. And after just 30 minutes with the file, she immediately understood why this case had been frozen: no body, no direct witnesses, no close-range camera footage, and every physical clue lacked clear connection. Yet what caught Jennings's attention wasn't those weaknesses, it was a report that had been overlooked for years, the section on the north-facing camera labeled as malfunctioning. The 2008 forensic report stated the camera had lost signal, but it didn't specify the cause, nor did it note any attempt to check for data recovery potential. Jennings frowned. Over the past 6 years, camera data recovery technology had advanced far beyond what existed when the case occurred. In 2008, white noise interference on a camera was typically deemed unrecoverable, but by 2014, even data thought useless could often be partially restored. This led Jennings to her first question that launched her into a new pursuit: was that camera truly broken, or had it simply been dismissed because the technology to handle it didn't exist back then? She started by reviewing the entire on-scene report from the parking lot where Hannah's car was found. The mismatched hair, industrial paint, cold storage boot prints, distant camera footage, capturing two figures. Jennings noted every old clue as if reading an unfinished story. But when she reached the description of the camera being off exactly during the window Hannah vanished, she stopped completely and leaned closer to the screen, because this detail was too anomalous. The precise moment the camera stopped functioning matched the exact moment Hannah's phone signal shut off abruptly. That alignment was too perfect to be coincidence. Jennings wrote a short line in her notebook: camera tampered with. The 2008 file also mentioned that the camera's cable had been dislodged from its connector, but the report didn't explain why there were no notes documenting signs of that tampering. Jennings immediately understood that in 2008, on-scene forensics may not have had the capability to deeply analyze the extent of interference. That was common in the early days of consumer digital cameras, but in 2014, she had what previous investigators did not: frame restoration tools, image reconstruction software, and signal distortion analysis. What needed to be done was to feed the old data drive into a modern system. Jennings promptly submitted a formal request to the Digital Forensics Lab to recover all raw data from the north-facing camera on the day Hannah disappeared. What surprised the technicians was that the camera data had never been deleted. It had simply sat in a corrupted video, unreadable category for 6 years. Jennings asked them to restore every possible frame, even if partial. The data recovery process took 8 days. During that time, Jennings continued re-examining everything related to Midwest Cold Storage and Daniel Hobb. She reviewed the civil records of Hobb's threatening behavior toward a former female coworker, checked his shift on the night Hannah vanished, and went over reports tied to the boot prints. She noticed a detail the 2008 team hadn't pursued aggressively: the connection between the industrial district and the route Hannah normally took after work. If Mark's vehicle GPS data was accurate, if the industrial boot prints around Hannah's car were accurate, then the possibility of someone from the industrial district appearing in the mall parking lot was entirely plausible. Jennings opened a map of Aurora, marking the Naperville Clinic, Hannah's usual route, the parking lot near the mall, then connecting it to Midwest Cold Storage. The lines formed a tight triangle, not too far apart. This discovery made her even more convinced that the mall camera held far greater value than the old file had indicated. On the 9th day, the tech lab sent her the initial report. Jennings opened the restored video, using next-generation software. The screen lit up with the familiar bands of white noise, but in the next few seconds, a hazy image gradually emerged: half the body of a light-colored sedan parked under the lot lights. Jennings sat up straight, eyes glued to the screen. In the following frames, the distorted image slowly clarified: a figure standing next to the car door, small in stature, appearing female. Though facial details weren't clear, The posture and body proportions immediately made Jennings think of Hannah. She advanced frame by frame slowly. Behind that figure, from the edge of the frame, something moved. A larger, taller figure stepped into view, even if only for fractions of a second, but enough for Jennings to recognize the gait and shoulder width, matching the description from the boot prints left around the car. Jennings froze the frame. Her heart beat faster. 6 years earlier, this camera had been deemed non-functional, but now it clearly showed an undeniable truth. Hannah was not alone in that parking lot. The footage wasn't enough to identify the man, but it was enough to prove someone stood next to Hannah right before her sedan was left behind. Jennings leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes for a few seconds to reorganize her thoughts. This video wasn't proof of guilt, but it completely changed the starting point of the investigation. It pinpointed the exact time and place where Hannah had contact with an unidentified man. It expanded the possibility that the camera wasn't accidentally malfunctioning, but may have been deliberately disabled. And most importantly, it pulled the Hannah Cole case out of no lead status and back onto an active investigative table for the first time in 6 years. Jennings opened her notebook and wrote a simple line: "Files no longer cold." The data recovery software continued running all night, and the next morning, Jennings received a notification from the tech lab. They had reconstructed a video segment totaling 6 seconds, short to the point of seeming almost meaningless in a normal investigation, but for the Hannah Cole file, where every single frame could be a turning point, those 6 seconds carried the weight of an entire reel. Jennings closed her office door, pulled the blinds to block light from hitting the screen, then opened the video at normal speed. The first few seconds were just blurry static specks, but as the software stabilized the frames, a scene emerged like an old, torn photograph, suddenly pieced back together in its proper sequence. Hannah standing outside her car. Though the image was grainy, and her face couldn't be clearly seen, the small build, slightly hunched shoulders, and the coat with its distinctive stitching along the shoulders confirmed it was her. She stood in front of the driver's door, but she didn't open it, didn't make any natural motion of preparing to get in. Instead, Hannah's body leaned slightly backward, as if recoiling from something. Jennings narrowed her eyes at the next frame. A second figure appeared from the left edge, outside the main field of view, but not far enough to be mistaken. The figure was nearly a head taller than Hannah, broad-shouldered, solid build. He walked straight toward her, not slowly, not rushing. Purposeful steps, like someone approaching with clear intent, rather than passing by chance. When Hannah registered his presence, the video captured a subtle but unmistakable movement. She turned her head to the right, and took half a step back. Though the image wasn't sharp enough to read emotion on her face, the shoulder tension and the arc of her arm clearly showed strain. This wasn't the motion of someone meeting a friend or acquaintance. This was a defensive reflex, the reflex of someone being closed in on without time to prepare. Jennings rewound the frame, trying to observe details no one in 2008 had the chance to see: the position of Hannah's hand. In one noisy frame, she saw the truth previous investigators had missed: Hannah's hand wasn't touching the door handle at all. In the third moment of the video, the dim yellow parking lot light reflected off the car's surface, creating a glossy sheen on the door window. And right in that reflection, Jennings saw something clearer than the actual footage: Hannah's hand hanging suspended in midair, not reaching for the handle, not preparing to open the door and get inside. This meant she was not the one opening the car door in that moment. The man advancing toward her was the one closing the distance, forcing her to step back. Jennings slowed down the 4th second. The man's shadow grew larger as he stood close to Hannah. The distance between them was now just a few dozen centimeters. His posture, slightly leaning forward, head tilted down as if saying something, made Jennings' chest tighten. This wasn't the behavior of someone asking for directions or bumping into an old acquaintance by chance. This was the motion of someone deliberately approaching, with purpose and complete control of the situation. In the 5th second, the image blurred as snow swept across the lens, but another detail emerged: light from a car headlight, reflected off the side mirror, revealing the shape of the man's hand reaching toward the front door. That hand was lifting, as if he was about to open the door or hold it, not Hannah. Jennings replayed that moment over and over. It was the first clue in the entire file, showing something undeniable. Hannah was not acting like someone preparing to get into her own car. She stood in a defensive position, stepping back when approached, and her hand never touched the door. The man was the one taking initiative. The 6-second was the final one before the camera went completely off. Hannah's figure was obscured by the man's back, and no further movement was captured. But those 6 seconds alone had shifted the entire direction of the investigation. Jennings opened Hartman's old notes, and crossed out the line he wrote in 2008, possible Hannah left the car voluntarily. That line now had to be erased. No more voluntarily. No more unclear circumstances. Those frames clearly showed Hannah was approached before her car was left behind. Jennings sent the video to the Behavioral Analysis Unit. Within an hour, they responded that the man's approach and Hannah's reaction indicated a clear power imbalance, one advancing, one retreating to avoid. She saved that result, then opened Daniel Hobbs' file. Hobbs' build, tall, broad-shouldered, matched the blurry figure in the video. Moreover, his maintenance work in the area near the clinic made it far more realistic that he could have known her appearance, habits, or schedule. But Jennings didn't stop there. She opened Mark Dalton's file. Mark was of similar height but slimmer, narrower shoulders. However, Mark's vehicle GPS placed him near the area at the critical time. Both men, Mark and Hobb, were present at key points in the case, but only one stood next to Hannah in the moment the camera captured. Looking back at the 6-second video, Jennings knew that even though the man's identity in the footage remained unidentified, the nature of his behavior was completely clear. This was the person who actively approached Hannah, not someone she met voluntarily. 6 seconds alone, but enough to completely rule out the possibility that Hannah disappeared of her own accord. The video ended in white static specks, the last image the camera recorded before its cable was pulled loose. Jennings turned off the screen and sat quietly for a moment. No one else, the camera itself, forgotten for 6 years, had spoken, revealing the pivotal moment the entire case revolved around, the moment Hannah Cole was confronted, approached, and perhaps the last moment before she vanished from this world. At the same time, Jennings was tracing the burner phone. An unexpected development came from the place she least expected, the cold case unit's tip line. A man left a message, saying he wanted to add information to the 2008 missing person case. At first Jennings thought it was a wrong call, because after 6 years, most witnesses had either forgotten details or misremembered them. But when she called back and heard the man's voice tremble slightly as he mentioned Hannah Cole's name, Jennings knew this wasn't a random call. The man identified himself as Mike Name, changed in the report at his request for anonymity, and he said one sentence that made Jennings stop writing immediately. "I'm the one who called 911 that night." The 2008 file recorded a 911 call from an unnamed man. When police arrived, no one was there, and the call was dismissed as worthless information. But now the caller had come forward, and what he provided shifted the entire case into a new phase. Jennings arranged to meet Mike at the cold case unit. The man was around 40, thin build, hands clenched tightly together, as if he had held a secret for too long. He began by apologizing for not coming forward in 2008. He was young then, afraid of legal involvement, and thought what he saw wasn't important enough. But for years the image of that snowy night had refused to leave his mind. Mike recounted every detail as if it had happened yesterday. That evening he was driving home after a night shift, the cold and heavy snow limited visibility. As he passed the mall parking lot area around 7:40 p.m., he slowed down because he saw something. A tall man gripping the wrist of a small woman. Jennings leaned forward. "Did you see clearly? Are you sure it was a woman?" Mike nodded immediately. "I remember clearly. She was wearing a light-colored coat, and she wasn't walking naturally. She was being pulled." He described the scene, the man leaning forward, hand clamped tightly on the woman's wrist, while she twisted half her body backward as if trying to pull away. It wasn't two people arguing, it looked like someone was trying to lead her or force her to move. Jennings asked, "Did you hear anything from them?" Mike shook his head. "My car windows were closed, and the snow was blowing hard. But her posture, I can't forget it. That wasn't the stance of two people who knew each other." Jennings could feel the authenticity in his account. This was something that had never appeared in any 2008 report. A direct eyewitness to a confrontation. When asked why he left without waiting for police, Mike bowed his head. "I was scared at the time. I had just stopped to watch when the man turned and looked straight at me, even though my headlights were still on. That look, I can't describe it, but it rattled me. I drove off, but then I panicked and called 911. I told them a man is pulling a girl by the arm, but I didn't dare give my name." To test the witness's reliability, Jennings showed him a photo array of several men with similar builds, including Mark Dalton, a few industrial district workers, and Daniel Hobb. Mike looked at each photo, shaking his head at many, until he paused for a very long time on one picture. His hand trembled slightly, and he nodded gently. "It's this guy. This is the man I saw." The photo he pointed to was Daniel Hobbs, taken 3 years earlier for his company ID card. Jennings kept her expression calm, but inside she knew this was no longer just speculation based on footprints or blurry video. This was a direct eyewitness who had seen coercive behavior right at the time Hannah disappeared, and positively identified the man in the photo without prompting. To be certain, Jennings asked Mike to describe the man in the parking lot compared to the photo. Mike said, "In the photo his hair is a little shorter than it was back then, but the walk, the broad shoulders, the height, I'm 100% sure. He moved like someone who carries weight, like someone used to heavy work." A description that matched perfectly with cold storage maintenance work. Jennings showed Mike the restored 6-second video again, and asked if it was the scene he remembered. Even though the image was grainy, Mike immediately recognized the man's movement in the footage. Exactly that stance. Exactly that posture. The girl stepping back is identical. With this identification, Jennings had a piece no one had obtained in 6 years, an eyewitness who saw Hannah being pulled by the wrist, and could accurately describe the man approaching her. And when that testimony was placed into the full context of the case, the burner phone purchased near Hobbs' home, Hobbs' vehicle near the clinic and mall, industrial boot prints around the car, paint matching the cold storage, video showing Hannah being approached. Jennings could finally see the outline of the person behind the disappearance. No longer a shadow in the snow, no longer a blurred figure hidden by camera noise. Now, through Mike's account, that man had a face, height, gait, and timing, all matching Daniel Hobb. Jennings recorded Mike's final words before he left the office. "I think that girl wanted to run, but that man didn't let her do it." That night, Jennings sent the report up the chain of command. The report ended with one heavy line: "Coercive behavior confirmed at the parking lot scene. Witness positively identifies Hobb." After 6 years of silence, the truth was finally beginning to emerge. After witness Mike came forward and positively identified the man who had grabbed Hannah's wrist, Jennings knew she couldn't rely solely on his testimony and the 6-second video. She needed to determine Hannah's exact route from the moment she left the clinic in Naperville until she appeared in the parking lot near the mall. Jennings retrieved the list of traffic cameras from 2008, a time when many devices were still analog, not streaming live but recording to local hard drives at each station. Many cameras had since been replaced under modernization programs, but the old data remained in the offline archives of the Illinois Department of Transportation. Some videos had been overwritten, some damaged from long-term storage, but Jennings didn't give up. After nearly 2 weeks of searching, a technician located an old hard drive from a traffic camera on Route 59, only 3 intersections from Hannah's clinic. This was the route Hannah took every day. The drive was dusty and showed signs of oxidation, but fortunately it was still readable. Jennings requested recovery of all data from December 14, 2008, specifically the time window from 6:30 to 8 p.m., the period when Hannah left the clinic. What she saw more than 6 years after the event sent a chill down her spine. On the screen, under the pale yellow glow of streetlights and drifting snow, The camera captured Hannah's light-colored sedan, moving slower than the speed limit, as if the driver were watching something or uncertain about the direction. But the important detail wasn't Hannah's car, it was the space behind it. 3 to 4 car lengths back was a black SUV, tall stance, thick front bumper, matching the model year of Daniel Hobbs' vehicle. The SUV maintained a steady distance, neither overtaking nor changing lanes, following Hannah's exact trajectory. Jennings replayed the footage over and over, then used image enhancement software to compare light reflections from street lamps on the hood and roof. The parameters matched too precisely to be coincidental. However, what truly made Jennings feel the case had just taken a sharp new turn appeared a few seconds later, farther back behind the black SUV, blurry but still recognizable, was a dark green pickup truck. Jennings froze the image and zoomed in. The pickup had an extended cab, a body style similar to Mark Dalton's truck, a 2005 model year pickup, green, with a roof rack and a slightly peeling decal on the rear door, a detail Mark had once mentioned when explaining why his truck frequently needed repairs. All those details appeared clearly in the newly recovered video. Jennings felt her pulse quicken. If the camera wasn't mistaken, if the analysis was accurate, then both men who had appeared in the investigative file, Mark and Hobb, were on the same road, at the same time Hannah left the clinic, and both were moving in the direction of Hannah's car. Jennings immediately rechecked the timestamp on each frame. Based on the traffic camera clock, the recording showed 7:13 p.m., a number that aligned chillingly with the moment Hobbs' burner phone powered on, and the call was placed to Hannah's phone. That meant when the burner phone called Hannah, both Hobbs' SUV and Mark's pickup were on Route 59, traveling in the same direction. Jennings opened the map and remarked the points of appearance: Hannah's car in front, the black SUV close behind, Mark's green truck several hundred meters farther back. A convoy of 3 vehicles in line, all heading toward the southern Aurora area, the same destination as the parking lot, where the mall camera later captured the moment Hannah was approached. Jennings had to pause for a few seconds to steady herself. For 6 years the original investigators had thought the case might revolve around one suspect, but the traffic camera footage revealed a more complicated truth. 2 men appeared simultaneously, at the exact time Hannah disappeared, on the same road leading to the scene. This opened 3 entirely new possibilities. 1. Mark was following Hannah without knowing Hobb was there. 2. Hobb was following Hannah without knowing Mark was there. Both were pursuing Hannah independently, and coincidentally appeared at the same time. The third possibility was almost impossible in criminal investigations, because the odds of 2 men who had prior conflicts or no known connection, both tailing Hannah, were extremely low. Jennings knew that. She continued analyzing the video more closely. The black SUV stayed very close, but did not merge lanes when Hannah turned right at the next intersection. That showed the driver was deliberately maintaining distance. Mark's truck stayed a bit farther back, but his speed remained nearly constant. Looking at the images, Jennings realized the black SUV was tailing Hannah more tightly than Mark's pickup, as if the SUV driver wanted to track her movements precisely. Mark kept greater distance, more like someone traveling the same route, but not necessarily watching closely. But the notable point was, both appeared at exactly the right time. This was no longer a clue, it was extremely strong indirect evidence, not 1 suspect present on Hannah's path of disappearance, but 2. Jennings quickly sent the video to the digital analysis unit for comparison of vehicle models, headlight height, front-end shape, and headlight angle to confirm 90 to 95% matches for Hobbs and Mark's vehicles. Just 10 minutes later, a specialist sent back the report. The SUV in the video matches 92% with Hobbs' vehicle. The pickup matches 88% with Mark's vehicle. No other comparable vehicles in the area matched more closely. Jennings wrote one line in the report: 2 men connected to the victim appeared at the same time on the road leading to the scene. Both followed the direction of Hannah's car. This placed the case in a new position. If Hobb approached Hannah in the parking lot, why was Mark also present? Had Mark witnessed the event but not dared speak up? Had he arrived earlier, and then left? Or did both have separate intentions? Jennings knew she couldn't conclude hastily, but the fact that both Mark and Hobb appeared in the 2008 footage, a detail no one had discovered before, was the pivotal piece that plunged the case deeper into the truth. And deep down, she knew this was no coincidence. Jennings knew that the fact both Mark and Hobb appeared simultaneously on Route 59 could not be taken lightly. The coincidence was too unusual, too precise in timing, and too close to Hannah's final journey. However, to move the investigation to the next level, she needed to understand the relationship between these two men who seemed completely unconnected. At the time of the 2008 investigation, there was no evidence showing Mark and Hobb had ever known or interacted with each other. But Jennings didn't believe in such complete separation. She requested access to all labor records related to the Aurora Industrial District during the period of 2005 to 2008, especially any joint projects between private businesses in the area. Just one day into the review, the records department sent up information that left Jennings motionless for a few seconds. In 2007, Mark Dalton and Daniel Hobb had worked together on a short-term cold storage repair contract that lasted 8 weeks. At the time, Mark was a subcontractor handling temporary electrical systems, while Hobb was the mechanical maintenance technician. The two were assigned to the same shift at least 3 times a week. That meant they had known each other. Not strangers, not two individuals who coincidentally appeared at the same time on Hannah's route. They had a history of contact a full year before the case occurred. Jennings immediately dug back into Mark's old file, particularly the financial statements that in 2008 police had no reason to examine deeply. She requested bank data for cash withdrawals and small transfers from October to December 2008. The results left on the screen sent a slight chill down her spine. In the 3 weeks before Hannah disappeared, Mark had withdrawn or transferred money 3 times, each amount between $200 and $350, and every single transaction was recorded as deposited into Daniel Hobb's account. Mark's payments to Hobb had never appeared in any 2008 report. No one had ever thought they had a financial connection, but the data didn't lie. Jennings underlined heavily in her notes, transactions between Mark and Hobb, 3 times, right around the time of disappearance. This was no longer a vague relationship, this was a form of exchange. But an exchange for what? To answer that question, Jennings requested recovery of all messages from Mark's phone, including deleted ones. The technology in 2014 allowed reconstruction of metadata and fragmented content, especially on older devices. 2 days later, the Digital Forensics Unit sent back a report that made Jennings read it from the beginning 3 times to make sure she wasn't misreading. Among the recovered messages was a short exchange, no recipient name saved, because it was likely sent to a temporary number, possibly a burner phone, or a newly changed one. The message wasn't long, just a single sentence, but it was enough to shift the entire case. Just need to know where she goes. The message was sent from Mark's phone, 6 days before Hannah disappeared. Jennings leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. For the first time in 6 years, there was written evidence showing Mark was interested in tracking Hannah. But more than that, the message, just need to know where she goes, wasn't aimed at a stranger. This was the tone of someone requesting, hiring, or assigning a task to someone else. And right below that message was the cash transaction from Mark to Hobb on the same day. Jennings no longer viewed the relationship between Mark and Hobb as coincidence. All the digital evidence was painting a clearer picture. Mark had reason to track Hannah after the breakup. Mark had claimed he wasn't near the area, but GPS showed otherwise. Mark said he and Hobb didn't know each other, but the 2007 records showed they worked together for weeks. Mark denied any exchanges, but bank data proved he had sent money to Hobb right before Hannah vanished. Jennings looked at the message again. It was too specific, too direct. Just need to know where she goes. It didn't mention Hannah by name, but the timing, the sender, and the chain of actions afterward made the meaning too clear. The question was no longer, was Mark following Hannah? The question became, did Mark hire Hobb to follow Hannah, or to do something else related to her? The appearance of both men on the Route 59 camera, evidence of Hobbs' SUV tailing Hannah, and the burner phone data. All of it came together to form what investigators call a two-suspect model, one with an emotional motive, and one with the capability to carry out the act. And in that model, Mark and Hobb fit perfectly at opposite ends. Jennings closed her laptop and walked to the whiteboard, where she had pinned the photos, Hannah in the center, surrounded by the pieces, burner phone, cold storage boot prints, paint match, 6-second video, Rote 59 camera, and now the mysterious message. She drew a line connecting Mark and Hobb. For the first time since the case was reopened, Jennings had no doubt these two men had a direct connection related to the night Hannah disappeared, and her next step was to find a way to force the truth to come out from their own mouths. When all the pieces, the messages, the transfers, the GPS, and the cameras, showed that Mark Dalton and Daniel Hobb had a direct connection before Hannah disappeared, Jennings understood that the data collection phase was over. It was time to confront them. The confrontation wasn't just about finding the truth, it was also about testing the reactions of two men who had insisted from the beginning that they were not connected to each other. Jennings decided to interview each one separately first, then consider bringing them face to face with the evidence at the same time. First was Hobb. He walked into the room with a noticeably different gait from his 2008 work demeanor, no longer indifferent or stubborn, but someone who felt backed to the edge of a cliff. Jennings opened her laptop, set the list of questions aside, and began in a calm voice. You stated in 2008 that you didn't know Mark Dalton. Does that statement still stand? Hobb answered too quickly to be natural. Not at all. I don't know him. Jennings pulled up a photo of the 2007 cold storage repair crew roster on the screen. Mark's photo, and Hobbs' photo, sat side by side on the shift schedule. You never met this man? Jennings asked. Never, Hobb replied, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Jennings turned the screen, showing Hobb the attendance log. The two men shared shifts 19 times, in the same maintenance area, same break room. Hobb swallowed hard, eyes blinking rapidly. I don't remember everyone I worked with back then. There were a lot of people, he said. Jennings didn't argue. She simply moved to the second piece of evidence, Mark's bank statement showing 3 transfers into Hobbs' account. How do you explain this? Hobbs stared at the numbers, then looked confused. I don't know. Maybe it's a mistake. But Jennings was prepared. She presented the bank summary confirming the recipient was exactly Daniel Hobb, personal account opened in 2004. A mistake 3 times in 3 weeks, Jennings asked, her voice still soft but sharp. Hobb began to waver noticeably, his lips tightened, eyes darting away. He no longer said I don't know, Mark. He shifted to defense. I didn't do anything wrong. He could have transferred money without me knowing. Jennings knew that was an absurd excuse. No one gets money deposited into their account 3 times and doesn't know. But she didn't press all the way. She wanted to see how Mark would react before putting them head to head. Mark was brought in a few hours later. He sat down, arms crossed, trying to maintain the composure he had during his first 2008 interview. But this time, Jennings wasn't asking simple questions. Mark, you said you didn't know Daniel Hobb. Is that statement still true? Mark nodded, without a second's hesitation. Jennings opened the 2007 cold storage repair file, and turned the personnel roster photo toward Mark. He looked at it, eyes flicking to Hobbs' picture, but showed no reaction too quickly for Jennings not to notice he had mentally prepared himself ahead of time. Don't remember. Dozens of guys in the warehouse. I don't remember every one, Mark said. Jennings kept her expression neutral. She simply moved to the next piece of evidence, the recovered text messages. You sent this message 6 days before Hannah disappeared. Just need to know where she goes. Who did you send it to? Mark was silent for 3 seconds, and in an interrogation, 3 seconds of silence is an abyss. Wrong number, Mark said. Has nothing to do with this. Jennings presented the second piece of evidence, the transfers to Hobb, and this was also a mistake. Mark clenched his fists. His answer didn't come right away. I paid someone to fix something. What's the problem? Fix something? Jennings raised an eyebrow. Why pay for repairs exactly 3 times right before Hannah disappeared? Mark switched to counterattack. You're trying to set me up. But Jennings didn't change her tone. She continued to the third piece of evidence, Mark's vehicle GPS showing him on Route 59 at the same time as Hannah's car and Hobbs' SUV. This time, Mark couldn't hold his composure. He's lying. I have nothing to do with that guy. Mark blurted out, and that reaction was exactly what Jennings needed. Just hours earlier, Hobbs had said the exact same thing about Mark. Both denied knowing each other, but the evidence proved they not only knew each other but had financial transactions right before Hannah disappeared. Jennings reviewed the file and recognized a familiar pattern in cases involving 2 suspects. When the evidence tightens, they start throwing blame at each other. And as expected, that's exactly what happened in the next confrontation session. When Jennings placed Mark and Hobbs in adjacent interview rooms, laid out the evidence on the table, and made it clear they knew about the messages, transfers and cameras, both men began reacting in completely different ways, blaming each other. Hobbs spoke first. He asked me to follow her. He's the one who wanted to know where she was. Jennings stayed silent, watching Mark's reaction. In the next room, when told of Hobbs' statement, Mark shot up. He's making it up to pin it on me. I never asked him to do anything. Jennings didn't rush to believe either one, but she recognized something critical. Both had moved from "I don't know anything" to "the other guy is responsible." This was the classic sign in cases of accomplices, or one person hiring another to carry out an act. When legal pressure mounts, both split to save themselves. At the end of the confrontation session, after documenting the full reactions of both men, Jennings wrote one important line: Mark and Hobbs deny knowing each other, but digital evidence proves a connection. When pressed, they blame each other. Indirect confirmation of involvement by both. The Hannah Cole case was no longer the story of a single suspect. It had become the story of 2 men, each holding a piece of the truth, and each terrified that the other piece would come out. When Mark and Hobbs began blaming each other, Jennings knew the investigation had moved into a phase where it could no longer rely solely on statements. She needed physical evidence, something undeniable, and the only location with the potential to contain that kind of evidence was Midwest Cold Storage, where Hobbs worked and where most of the leads pointed. Jennings prepared the search warrant application for the prosecutor's office, based on the accumulated evidence, the parking lot video, Route 59 camera footage, the burner phone, Mark's text message, vehicle routes, and Hobbs' behavioral history. The warrant was approved in just 3 hours. That night, the investigative team entered the Aurora Industrial District under headlights, reflecting off the snow and the constant low roar of refrigeration compressors inside. The maintenance area where Hobbs worked lay at the back of the cold storage, a wide but dimly lit space where flickering fluorescent lights made it feel even colder than the actual temperature. Forensics began examining the rack systems, the industrial paint area, and the access paths leading into the technical room. At the old hinge of a metal door, a technician bent down and immediately called Jennings over. The peeling black paint at the joint edge matched perfectly with the paint sample collected from Hannah's car door handle. Jennings didn't need anyone to explain further. This was the first physical evidence showing contact between an object in the cold storage and Hannah's car very close to the time of her disappearance. But that wasn't the most significant find of the search. As forensics moved deeper into the less trafficked area, the western corner of the warehouse, accessible only to maintenance personnel, they suddenly discovered a series of deep footprints impressed into the fine frost-clinging dust on the concrete floor. Jennings ordered on-site measurements. The results tightened her chest. The sole tread pattern matched 100% with the footprints around Hannah's sedan in the mall parking lot. No discrepancies, no room for error. The person who appeared around Hannah's car was someone who had walked in the specialized area of Midwest's cold storage, and according to personnel records, the only individual authorized to access that area at the time in 2008 was one person, Daniel Hobbs. Jennings stood looking at the footprints stretching deep into the corner of the warehouse like a silent trail, recreating the path of the man the 2008 camera had captured in only 6 brief seconds. The footprints stopped at a dark corner where light spilled from a ventilation fan. A technician shone a UV light down. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The concrete surface began to glow in scattered small but distinct spots. Forensics immediately collected the fluorescent samples and sealed them in evidence bags. Those were biological traces. And right there in the cold storage corner, the preliminary DNA analysis team reported the traces belonged to a woman. Jennings stood motionless. The traces were in an area a normal employee could not enter. And there was no legitimate reason for a woman's DNA, unknown or otherwise, to appear in a restricted access corner where only maintenance staff were allowed. More importantly, this area was just a few steps from the rear door, a discreet exit that an SUV could reach without being captured on camera. Jennings requested a review of the warehouse's internal 2008 cameras, but as she expected, the maintenance area cameras from that time had low resolution and only 30 days of storage before being overwritten. Nothing remained to review, but what Jennings did have was the footprints, the paint and the DNA, 3 physical pieces connecting to one single destination. Midwest Cold Storage was the location where someone had brought a woman during the time frame of Hannah's disappearance. Forensics continued the search. At an old rack support, there was a long scrape as if something sharp had dragged across it, consistent with the scratch on Hannah's rear door. A technician measured the angle and reported the scrape height matched exactly the position of the scratch on the sedan, meaning an external object had contacted the car before it entered the warehouse. The question arose, had Hannah's car once been near the technical area door before being left at the mall, or had some piece of cold storage equipment struck the car during some process? Jennings couldn't conclude yet, but the evidence samples were beginning to build a far more terrifying scenario than the 2008 investigators had ever imagined. Hannah may have been brought here. Jennings cautiously stepped back and surveyed the overall area. The dim warehouse corner, frost dust preserving footprints for years, the secluded spot out of other employees' view, and a rear door leading to an unmonitored parking area. If someone wanted to hold a person briefly, to wait for a transfer elsewhere, to avoid detection, this space was terrifyingly perfect. A technician approached Jennings with the preliminary analysis results. This DNA doesn't match any female employee at Midwest. It doesn't match Hannah's sample from the 2008 file, but it is female DNA. Jennings knew what that meant. Either the DNA belonged to Hannah, but the 2008 sample was flawed, or it belonged to another woman, or Hannah had left traces here after her disappearance, before police collected her sample. All possibilities were serious. All opened an investigative direction never before explored. Jennings ordered the maintenance area immediately secured, and all evidence collected, from paint samples, footprints, DNA, to microfibers clinging to the racks. The cold storage warehouse had become the second crime scene in the Hannah Cole case, a scene no one had known about for 6 years. As the forensics team left the warehouse, Jennings lingered for a few seconds. The sound of the refrigeration units hummed like the slow heartbeat of a massive building trying to hold on to its secret, a secret now beginning to reveal itself piece by piece. She wrote in the report, "Physical evidence indicates the victim or an unidentified woman was present in the maintenance area of Midwest Cold Storage at a time coinciding with the day of disappearance. Further investigation required." And for the first time, she saw a lead that could answer the biggest question of the past 6 years. Where was Hannah after she vanished from the mall camera? The search of Midwest Cold Storage produced the first physical evidence Jennings could place on any prosecutor's desk without fear of rejection. Paint matching Hannah's car, footprints perfectly matching those at the mall scene, and female DNA found in the restricted maintenance corner, where only maintenance personnel were allowed. But to go further, to turn these scattered pieces into a solid legal foundation, Jennings needed the final step, presenting the case to the grand jury. This is the step for complex cases, where the prosecutor must present a tight chain of reasoning based on forensics, timeline, electronic data, and suspect behavior. Jennings spent nearly 2 weeks organizing the entire file into chronological order, not as a story, but as a logical system where each piece of evidence pushed the viewer toward the same conclusion. On the morning of the grand jury session, Jennings walked into the room with Prosecutor Miller, carrying 4 boxes of documents, a USB containing all recovered video, GPS data, and forensic reports. The room fell silent as the screen opened with the first image, Hannah's light-colored sedan moving along Route 59, followed by the black SUV, and farther back the dark green pickup of Mark Dalton. Jennings presented clearly, her voice calm but sharp. "This is 7:13 p.m., the night Hannah Cole disappeared. The 2 vehicles behind her were not a coincidence. They belonged to Mark Dalton and Daniel Hobb." A grand jury member asked, "Are you certain those are their vehicles?" Jennings moved to the forensic analysis slide, vehicle ground clearance models, light reflections, taillight patterns, and model year specifications. The comparison showed 92% match to Hobb's SUV, and 88% match to Mark's pickup. No one in the room objected further. The next slide was the burner phone, ping data around the mall, activation history near Hobb's home, the call to Hannah, 42 minutes before she left the clinic. Jennings pointed to the map. The only call from this burner phone was to the victim. Its location aligns with the route of both suspects. She presented more evidence on Mark's vehicle GPS. He appeared near the clinic and mall despite claiming he wasn't anywhere near there that night. Then came the recovered text message, "Just need to know where she goes." The room went quiet. No one misunderstood the meaning of those words. Jennings moved to the mall parking lot forensic evidence, large footprints, PPE-style boots used in cold storage, matching exactly the type Midwest issued to maintenance staff. Photos of the footprints in snow and in the warehouse were placed side by side, an irrefutable comparison. She said these footprints didn't appear by chance. They belonged to someone authorized to enter the cold storage maintenance area. Based on 2008 personnel records, that person was Daniel Hobb. Then came the black paint on Hannah's door handle, and the paint on the warehouse maintenance door hinge. Jennings presented the chemical analysis. The 2 paint samples are indistinguishable. This is not automotive paint. This is industrial paint used only by Midwest at that time. The jurors began exchanging glances. Pieces that had been scattered for 6 years were now arranged like a complete map. Jennings continued, "Witness Mike, who called 911 in 2008, has come forward. He described seeing a tall man pulling a small woman by the wrist. When shown a photo lineup, he immediately pointed to Daniel Hobb. The 6-second mall camera video was played. The grainy image clearly showed the man advancing on Hannah. The forgotten camera memory revived after 6 years. Some jurors turned away when they saw Hannah stepping back, but Jennings didn't stop. The reflection on the car window shows Hannah did not open the door herself. Someone else was about to open it for her. When she reached the Midwest Cold Storage search report, the room fell completely silent. Jennings presented female DNA was found in the maintenance corner. It matches no employee. There is no reason for any woman's DNA to be in that restricted area, unless she was brought there. A juror raised a hand. Could the DNA be Hannah's? Jennings answered, "We are awaiting final comparison results, but we cannot rule it out, and the timing of the DNA appearance aligns with the day she disappeared." She concluded by presenting the complete timeline. 6:58 p.m., burner phone activated near Hobb's home. 7:04 p.m., call to Hannah. 7:13 p.m., Route 59, Hannah's car Hobb's SUV, Mark's truck. 7:40 p.m., witness Mike sees man pulling woman's arm. 7:46 p.m., Hannah's phone shuts off. 7:50 p.m., burner phone's final ping near the mall. Afterward, industrial footprints around the car, matching paint, DNA in the cold storage. When Jennings finished, Prosecutor Miller spoke clearly. "We ask one final question. Do these 2 men have a valid alibi?" A long silence followed. No one in the room had an answer. Miller continued, "From the forensic chain digital data and witness testimony, we asked the grand jury to indict Mark Dalton and Daniel Hobb for their roles in the disappearance and abduction of Hannah Cole." The vote came faster than Jennings expected. Just minutes later, the grand jury issued its official decision, sufficient evidence to indict both Mark Dalton and Daniel Hobb. 6 years after Hannah vanished on that snowy night, justice finally took clear shape. Jennings closed the file, knowing the next steps would be long, tense, and full of unanswered questions. But with the grand jury's decision, the Hannah Cole case officially left the shadows of a cold file and stepped into the light of the courtroom. When the grand jury officially issued the indictment decision, arrest warrants were signed the same day for both Mark Dalton and Daniel Hobb. Jennings and the investigative team split into two groups. One headed to apprehend Hobb at the Aurora Industrial District, the other approached Mark at his home. Both were handcuffed in a state of confusion, offering no resistance, but their psychological reactions were completely opposite. Mark was frantic and tried to explain from the very first moment, while Hobb remained silent, his face as cold as ice, speaking only one short sentence, "I want a lawyer." At the station, they were placed in two separate interview rooms, and Jennings prepared to enter the most critical phase, extracting the truth from the two men every piece of evidence pointed to. She started with Mark, because his demeanor was weaker, more likely to crack. Mark sat restlessly, hands clenched as if trying to control his breathing. Jennings placed each piece of evidence on the table: the text message, Route 59 camera footage, bank transfers, burner phone data, and GPS records. Mark's hands shook when he saw the message again: "Just need to know where she goes." After several minutes of silence, Mark began to speak, not with the voice of an innocent man, but of someone who had kept a secret too long. "I asked Hobb to keep an eye on her." Jennings didn't react immediately. "Keep an eye on her. I just wanted to know where she went. I didn't ask him to do anything else." Mark said, eyes fixed on the table. "She was avoiding me. I just wanted to understand what was happening." Jennings flipped to the next page. "You paid Hobb 3 times. You claim you asked for nothing more than knowing where Hannah went." Mark swallowed hard. "Yes, I swear." But Jennings knew that was only half the truth, and she needed the rest. She said, "Mark, Hobb told us something different." Mark looked up, eyes wide. "What did he say?" Jennings kept her voice calm, but each word cut the air like a knife. "Hobb stated that you asked him to stop Hannah from leaving." Mark shot up from his chair, voice cracking. "No, I didn't say that. He's lying to pin it on me." Jennings watched him, neither judging nor sympathizing. "Then why did you hire a cold storage worker, someone you knew had a prior history of violent behavior, to monitor the woman who used to be your girlfriend?" Mark didn't answer. Jennings continued, "Did you know he was at the mall parking lot with Hannah?" Mark gripped his hair, almost pulling it out from the pressure. "I followed her that night, but I didn't know he was there too." The words slipped out of Mark's mouth like a reflex, but they were also the most important admission yet. He had followed Hannah on the night she disappeared. That erased every previous statement he had made. Jennings let a few seconds of silence pass before leaving the room. She walked to Hobb's interview room. Hobb sat upright, unmoving, eyes fixed like someone who had decided silence was the only shield he had left. But Jennings had the advantage. Mark had already confessed a part, and now she only needed a gentle push. "Mark said you monitored Hannah, at his request." Jennings began. Hobb didn't react. Jennings continued, "But you told us Mark wanted you to stop Hannah from leaving. The two statements don't match." Hobb smirked, a small reaction, but enough for Jennings to know he was weighing his options. "I said what I remember," Hobb replied coolly. Jennings placed a copy of the bank transfer records in front of him. "Mark paid you exactly 3 times, but you can't explain why you received this money." Hobb exhaled sharply, but said nothing. Jennings leaned closer to the table. "Hobb, I'm not asking about Mark anymore. I'm asking you the most important thing. Where did you take Hannah?" A cold smile appeared on Hobb's face, not one of confidence, but the smile of someone who knew speaking more would only make things worse. "I didn't take anyone anywhere," he said. Jennings looked straight at him, unflinching. "Female DNA in the cold storage, your footprints around Hannah's car, matching paint, mall camera, 911 witness, Route 59 camera, and the burner phone." Each piece of evidence was read like hammer blows on the table, but Hobb only replied, "You don't have a body." Jennings showed no emotion, even though he was right. That was the only weakness in the entire case. No body doesn't mean no crime. Jennings said. "You know that too." Hobb didn't look at her, just stared into the corner of the room, as if calculating a hopeless escape. When Jennings stepped out, she was certain of one thing. Both Mark and Hobb knew far more than they had revealed. They weren't just hiding their actions, they were hiding something bigger, something that could bring both of them down, if exposed. And that something lay in this. Mark knew because he was the one who hired. Hobb knew because he was the one who carried it out. But neither would reveal where Hannah was taken. That spoke a truth: the place existed, or had existed. Jennings returned to her office, and pinned one final sheet to the timeline board. Mark states only monitoring. Hobb states stop her from leaving. Neither reveals where she was held. Everything led to the final question. The question no one had dared voice in 6 years. Where was Hannah taken after those last 6 seconds on the mall camera? And both Mark and Hobb held the key to that answer. The trial of Mark Dalton and Daniel Hobb took place nearly a year after the grand jury issued the indictment decision. It was one of the most watched trials in Kane County in many years, not because the two defendants denied guilt, but because the case went to trial even without the victim's body. A no-body case is always a major challenge for prosecutors, but the chain of forensic evidence and digital data in the Hannah Cole case was so strong that the jury only needed to connect the pieces to see the full picture. The first piece the prosecution presented was Hannah's final journey. Route 59 camera footage showed her light-colored sedan moving slowly, tailed closely by Hobbs' black SUV, with Mark Dalton's green pickup following farther back. Video analysis experts testified about vehicle matches, light reflection simulations, and front-end structures, showing such a high degree of correspondence that it could not be coincidence. Next came the burner phone, digital evidence showing a single call made to Hannah from a device purchased near Hobbs' home, traveling along the route to the mall parking lot, then shutting off right when the disappearance occurred. This part silenced the courtroom, because it proved Hannah's approach had been premeditated, not a spontaneous event. The prosecution continued with the 6-second recovered mall camera video, grainy but clear enough to show Hannah being approached, forced to step back, and the man standing close to her was not Mark. Forensic experts analyzed body shape, gait, and height, showing a fit with Hobb. Then came the footprints, PPE-style cold storage boot treads, matching perfectly between the mall parking lot scene and Midwest's maintenance area. Those footprints were in a place only one person could have entered, Daniel Hobb. Next was the industrial paint. Chemical analysis chains proved the paint on Hannah's car and the paint on the cold storage warehouse hinge were indistinguishable, with only one place in Aurora using that paint in 2008. The prosecution didn't just present, it rebuilt a 3D model, showing Hannah's sedan had contacted a metal surface in the cold storage. The female DNA found in the warehouse corner, matching no employee and unexplainable, was the final piece reinforcing the theory that Hannah had been brought there. And finally, the human element, witness Mike's testimony, who saw Hobb pulling a woman matching Hannah's description by the wrist in the parking lot. This testimony, combined with video and forensics, formed an unbreakable chain. For Mark, the prosecution presented the text, "Just need to know where she goes," and 3 money transfers to Hobb. Mark denied hiring Hobb, but couldn't explain why he paid someone he didn't know right before Hannah disappeared. For Hobb, he remained mostly silent, only denying he harmed anyone, but the forensics spoke for him. As the trial stretched into its 3rd week, the defense tried to argue that without a body, there was no proof of outcome, but Prosecutor Miller stood before the jury and said one sentence that left the courtroom dead silent. "No body doesn't mean no truth. The truth is in what these 2 men tried to bury, and forensics brought it to the surface layer by layer." When the jury retired to deliberate, observers thought it would take a long time, but it took just over 4 hours, an unexpectedly short time for a no-body case. The verdict was read aloud in the courtroom. Mark Dalton, guilty. Daniel Hobb, guilty. Mark was sentenced to 28 years for his indirect accomplice role, hiring surveillance, attempting control, and participating in the chain of actions leading to Hannah's disappearance. Hobb was sentenced to 34 years for direct conduct, approaching, coercing, and participating in holding the victim at an undisclosed location. Both bowed their heads as the sentence was read, but neither admitted where Hannah had been taken after that snowy night. Even though Hannah's body was never found, the case was recorded in Illinois criminal files as a solved no-body case, a rare but legally significant type of case, proving that investigative science, digital data, and time can combine to break the silence of files thought dead. When Jennings packed up the final file, she wrote one line in the summary report: "No body, but there is truth." In the cold room, where suspects once boldly declared "you can't prove anything, only papers remained" now, the 6-second video footage, footprints preserved in photos, and a red-stamped sentence, all contributing to giving Hannah Cole the justice that 6 years earlier had seemed impossible. Aurora has never forgotten this case, and thanks to Jennings and the Cold Case Unit, it will never be forgotten again. The story of the Hannah Cole case, though fictionalized in true crime style, reflects a profound reality in modern American life. Sometimes the truth doesn't lie in one big moment, but in dozens of small details we easily overlook: a footprint covered by snow, a broken camera, or an 11-second call from a burner phone. Those fragments in the investigation remind us that in modern life, each person's safety is tied to seemingly trivial behaviors: sharing personal schedules, revealing daily routines, or not noticing who keeps appearing around their life. Hannah leaving the clinic, and not realizing she was being followed by more than one person, Hobbs' SUV and Mark's pickup, is a powerful reminder that violence and control often come in quiet forms before they become obvious. Americans, especially women, can draw lessons about vigilance in daily journeys, using modern tools like trusted location sharing, noting unusual routine changes, or raising alarms when feeling followed. The investigation also shows the positive side of community. Witness Mike finally came forward, after 6 years, and that changed the entire case. It's a reminder that civic responsibility, whether a 911 call, or reporting something unusual, can save lives. And the persistence of the Cold Case Unit demonstrates that science, technology, and perseverance can bring justice back even when hope seems gone. From this story, the lesson for Americans is clear: stay vigilant, care about each other, and never think a tiny detail is unworthy of being spoken, because sometimes that very detail saves the truth. If you find the journey to reclaim justice for Hannah Cole meaningful and cautionary, and want to join us in shining light on more cases brought to truth, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. Thank you for watching, and see you again in stories where we continue searching for light in the dark corners of life.